Hi everyone, it's Jen again. Hope that you had a good week. I had a pretty chill week. I did end up releasing Esper X Guide demo for Otome Jam this week. So I thought I would take today to just kind of go over some analytics for those of you who might be wondering what kind of traffic does a game that's not really promoted by a developer who doesn't really have much of a social media presence. What kind of numbers for somebody who's been doing this for 5 years, like what can they maybe expect. I do think that my games have a decent amount of visual polish as far as like the artwork presented on the web page and the thumbnail. Nothing super spectacular, but definitely something more interesting and has a unique enough style than like perhaps a indie game that was made with like mostly assets or very low poly 3D models. So I'm sorry, store-bought assets. My voice might go in and out a little bit. I apologize in advance. The weather here has been like a heat wave. Very humid. Apparently this year has also been record levels of like pollen. So I don't know if it's allergies, if it's just being in air conditioning 24/7 because of how hot it is. But my sinuses are kind of like a mess right now. Anyways, I just thought for a point of comparison, I would go ahead and start by showing the analytics to when I released Arcane Dice Wars in 2023, I believe. Yeah. So this was March. For whatever reason, I'm hovering over the third day of release. But you can see I goofed up on something. So the first day of release, I didn't actually have the downloads enabled, so there's no downloads on the first day. The second day, I think it was probably, it looks like on the graph we can estimate it was around 200 views. And I've noticed a pattern, at least with my releases, that usually like the first day and the third day have like similar views and visibility, and then like the second day is the day that usually peaks. And I think I usually tend to release around like late morning Eastern time, so maybe around like 10 or 11 o'clock is when I usually tend to post. So whether or not that makes a difference in first day traffic, I'm not really sure. To be honest, by the time I'm ready to release, I just need to throw it out there and like kind of whether or not I release at the most optimal time on the most optimal day, I don't know. I feel like even if you did chase those kinds of like numbers and statistics, there would be so many other people that would be chasing those same numbers and statistics that, you might end up with the same amount of chance of getting seen as if you just picked like the worst time and the worst day because at least less people would probably pick that time, less to compete with in that regards, because that's pretty much like the biggest hurdle, right, is having a chance to be seen with so many games being released at any moment. So this was Arcane Dice Wars, and this was about on par with what I expected. I had a pretty what's the word? Disappointing, I guess, launch with Hungry. That game just didn't really get any visibility. Wasn't things that people were interested in. Didn't do a good job of selling the idea or conveying the idea. I think it just lacked clarity, and so I did end up dropping that project. The workflow wasn't like super sustainable anyways because it was like so asset heavy as far as like the visuals. We're looking at probably around 50 downloads in the kind of like launch window, I think you would say, and you can see that it tapers off pretty hard after that. On the bright side, at least coming from the standpoint of like not releasing on Steam, not looking to monetize, not trying to I guess, capitalize on that first day visibility, at least in my experience. Besides Hungry, which did kind of get swallowed up by the internet void, never to be seen again. My other games continue to have like trickle-in traffic. Even Soul Union, which was my first release back in 2020, and I really haven't done much to update that game. It's a very imperfect work, and it still gets some little downloads and views here and there, I would say, on a weekly basis. So I find that encouraging, that, you know, maybe your launch is a little lackluster or not what you hoped it would be. There's still a chance that you could get some traffic if what you have there is a compelling piece of art. However, it's not guaranteed. And I'll use Hungry as the example as a not guaranteed. Because when I created Hungry, I did have some followers. I did have my YouTube channel. So those things have grown since. But I don't think it's ever like a guaranteed. Like, just because you have 1,000 followers on itch.io doesn't mean that that will necessarily translate to players if what you're making is not what those players are interested in. It's still got to align with their interests, and you still have to create an experience that is compelling and an idea that's cohesive that they're going to be able to understand and to want to try, because you can't assume that people will be willing to try your work based on your previous works, because a lot of times people will discover your work in isolation, not through you as a developer or studio, but your work just as it stands alone. I don't get much traffic from my YouTube. I know that I don't have like a huge following, but whether or not this YouTube channel, it's not here to drive traffic to my games. If it was, it would not be a good use of my time. I create this YouTube channel to just talk about my experience and hopefully encourage people who might be in a similar situation as mine to give it a try if that's something that they're interested in, because I don't see a lot of visibility of full-time working middle-aged moms getting into game development. So that's why I put my stuff out there. To just be this little voice of like, hey, there's somebody out here doing this, so you could do it too. Because as much as I'd like to think that I'm not influenced by, you know, that sort of thing, that I can just like pursue the things that I'm interested in without having to have the affirmation of like society telling me, it does have an impact. I think I would have gotten into game development earlier if I had thought of it as being a more plausible avenue for me. Going back to the analytics anyways. I apologize for always getting derailed. This was what Arcane Dice Wars looked like, and I would say that Villain's Heart looked about the same when that launched. And looking at Esper X Guide, this is kind of an interesting deviance from like my usual launches. I did have higher views than I normally would have. You can see on my launch here that the first and third days I am at the upper 200s, versus here was 138 130s, so almost 100, a little over 100 more views on those days. And then we can see the peak was almost doubled too. So I think the peak was around 200, and now we see the peak is at 466. Is this because I have 5 years of development behind me and I have more followers now than I had before? Perhaps that might have played a small role, but I think the major role here is that you can see this is the first time in my analytics that I've ever gotten any substantial traffic outside of itch.io. And this is coming from Google search. So I think that this actually has to do with the title of my game being Esper X Guide. that this is a kind of an homage and a subversion of an existing very super niche trope called Guideverse. And so it's possible that people who are looking for information about Guideverse could have used the search term EsperX Guide. And when you type that into Google, it's actually the first result, which is crazy to me because I know it's a super niche like theme, but it's still kind of it's got more traction in like Korean, especially web novels. That's where I learned about it, and I started getting interested in the Guideverse. Was from like manhwa and Korean web novels, because I do read a lot of Korean web novels. So yeah, it's very interesting to me that I happened to pick a title that coincided with I guess a search term used to look at those things. I think that had a large part in the visibility of my game, and it gives me a little bit more, I guess, optimism that this game won't just disappear into the void of the internet, never to be seen again. But could I have predicted that when I created like the name for the game? No, not at all. Originally the title was going to be EsperX Guide X Tower, because it was going to play a lot from like the Hunterverse tropes as well. But I ended up simplifying it to just EsperX Guide, because I thought that would be a shorter title, a more direct title to the themes of the game. And the most I did was just a cursory Google search to make sure that there was no other game called EsperX Guide, but I didn't really think about it at the time that, hey, this could be a term that people could just randomly type in and stumble upon my game when they're not looking for it. So that was kind of, I guess, a happy accident. But you can see when we look at overall like traffic that itch.io is still like ahead of like all the Google things combined, even though like google.com I guess was like the highest as far as like a single URL referral. But it's interesting. So I thought I would just share that, because that was definitely nothing that I ever predicted. Whether or not that's something you could try for or shoot for, I couldn't say. I think I did hear about some Kickstarter incident that happened where they named their Kickstarter something about like dragons, and Harry Potter had some Harry Potter game had some kind of update that had to do with dragons around the same time, and so they ended up getting a bunch of like accidental traffic from that. So it can happen. Whether or not that was like a planned strategy, I couldn't say. It could just be lightning in a bottle, and certainly this isn't something that's like, oh, it's gonna like, I don't know, make me go viral or anything, because again, it's like a super niche of a super niche. But it's still I just thought it was kind of interesting, because it was the first time anything like that happened to me. So yeah, launch I think went really well. I'm super happy with that. And maybe these are numbers that would make other people's cry. I don't know, but I try not to look at what other people's numbers are doing, and just compared to my own numbers, I'm very happy with how that has been going, how that is going, and I think that's the best attitude to go into it. It's hard not to compare yourself to other people and how other projects are doing, but especially for like not really putting much effort, if any, into like advertising my stuff. I think it's good. I have tried in the past to post on Reddit and things. Probably never tried persistently enough or put in enough effort to make much of a difference, but again, never got any substantial traffic from anything outside of itch.io. That's my experience personally, if you have a more of a presence, or you have a more cohesive or popular idea, maybe you would have a different experience. But I feel like there's a lot of advice out there that tells people that they need to advertise, advertise, advertise. And I don't know how effective that really is, depending on whether or not you have something that's very marketable. I create things that fill my own niche interests, so they're just not that marketable as far as mainstream goes. And I'm okay with that because I just make what makes me happy. Looking at Soul Union, which I released like 5 years ago, I thought I would just show the analytics for that, because we can see that even up until recently, it did get a download and a handful of views. We can see it gets a little handful of, views. Like usually every day, at least gets a couple views. So that's something. And then we can see that it still gets a little download here and there. And all that adds up to people still finding it and still enjoying it, I guess, or not enjoying it, but at least trying it. So, so that's just hopefully an encouragement to that. Yeah, I have not updated this in 3 years, and the last build of it has still gotten all these downloads that trickled in over the last 3 years at the pace of like literally 1 or 2 a day. It adds up. We look at the current Arcane Dice Wars analytics, where the last update I made was 3 months ago, and that's what this is looking like. And there was a little bit of an outlier with it recently, because somebody else posted on a thread recommending it. Thank you to the poster who did that, because that did actually give it a big bump in traffic. But me trying to promote it myself in a way that's acceptable and conforms with guidelines, I've never gotten any substantial traffic. So if Reddit is a good place to get a signal boost, it probably is something that you can't force. That it just has to happen because somebody else wants to advocate for you, I'm guessing. Yeah, those are the numbers. Thank you everyone who has supported and tried my projects over the years. I am greatly appreciative of that. Greatly appreciative of your time, and especially if you're willing to communicate with me and let me know your thoughts and your experiences. I'm always very grateful for that. Whatever the numbers reflect, I try not to forget that each one of these is hopefully a person, not just a bot. But especially when they comment on it, then I can assume that it's a person. And that's why I do what I'm doing at the end of the day, is to hopefully be able to make some type of human connection with others. And it's upcoming week. I am going to be taking the rest of the month off to just kind of like make some gift art, decide whether or not I'm going to participate in Art Fight. And if I do, then I'll make some reference sheets, getting involved more with my work projects and with supporting people for our summer community event at work. So we'll see. I'll definitely start working on the next EsperX Guide update starting in July. Take care. Don't forget to enjoy the process, and have a good week coming up. Bye.